I'm listening to your show.
A point that there's limited news
I just
coverage.
want to know what your viewpoint is.
Do because major news organizations have been told on, what they can report on.
The People's Voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is The People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am The People's Voice. Thank you again for checking us out this week. It is greatly appreciated. Hope everyone has had a productive and enlightening week. And again, I appreciate you checking out the podcast as we get started here today. So, today I want to get into a discussion about bail, and specifically commercial bail here in the United States in that process. As many of you may know, just from hearing the stories or doing maybe your own research, or just conversation in general. The conversation around bail reform in the United States has been pretty hot and heavy. I would say definitely for the last 3-4 years, kind of, through the whole Ferguson and then Black Lives Matter and then the pandemic and George Floyd. There's been a lot of conversations about the, criminalization of particularly people of color and policing, obviously, in neighborhoods of color, which kind of brings me to the topic today, because in these communities where you have over policing and you have criminalization of people of color, all of that eventually leads to many people ending up in jail. And, one of the consequences of being arrested and landing into jail is that you now have to figure a way to get out of jail, and then also, how are you going to be able to defend yourself? Because, a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, but many people assume that once you are arrested, you have committed a crime and you basically are going to court to, find out what your sentencing is. And, that's not what, arrest is about. It's basically you've been accused of something, and you have the opportunity to defend yourself, to present whatever evidence or, give whatever testimony that you can lend to alleviate yourself from that situation. Now, one of the challenges with that is that when you are arrested, you have to have the proper income to fight that case, so to speak. And this is where we land at with commercial bail in the United States. The process of bail is, again, being heavily scrutinized. And, based on some of this research that I was doing for this podcast, I definitely understand why. Now, not to say that I didn't understand it before, because, I've come from a neighborhood that was very overly policed. And, during my time and even as an adult now, unfortunately, I know many people that have unfortunately had to go through this. So I'm very familiar with the process. But when you do research into some of these topics, and I encourage everyone to do it. I mean, I'm doing it for the podcast, but, before the podcast, this is, things that I've done because I like to be aware of what is taking place, particularly here in the country that I occupy. But anyway, getting back. So what happens is you have communities that are very over policed. This is typically communities of color. And then what ends up happening is that a person is arrested and taken to jail. Now, I'm just talking about jail. I'm not talking about prison. I'm talking about local jail. And now the person is sitting in jail and they want to get out, right? Nobody wants to sit in jail. This is where bail comes in. So, as always, let me give a quick definition of bail and then I'll kind of, move the conversation along. So, what is bail? And again, this is bail in the United States. And actually, there are not many countries that still do cash bail. I think it's the Philippines and the United States are, I think, the last two, if I believe. I know Australia and South Africa and a couple of other countries have done away with it. But the United States and I know the Philippines are the two countries that still do cash bail. But what is bail? So bail, and I'm reading the definition directly from the American Bar Association. Bail is the amount of money defendants must post to be released from custody until their trial. Bail is not a fine. That's key. That's key information. It is not supposed to be used as punishment. The purpose of bail is simply to ensure that defendants will appear for trial in all pretrial hearings for which they must be present. Bail is returned to defendants when their trial is over, and in some states, minus a processing fee. That's the official definition from the American Bar Association, right? Now, here's the thing, and let me go back to that definition because there's some key elements in here. Number one, bail is not supposed to be used as a punishment, okay? That's number one. The purpose of bail is to simply ensure that people who have been accused, again, not convicted, people that have been accused of a crime come back to court for their trial to defend themselves against the accusation that has been placed against them. And then the third thing is bail is returned to defendants when their trial is over. This is where the conversation now flips over from what the purpose of bail is, and then we go into the commercial bail industry. Now, the commercial bail industry in the United States is designed to support that last part of that definition where bail is returned to defendants when their trial is over. Well, in many cases, again, because the arrests are taking place at a higher rate in communities of color and lower income communities, many times the individuals that are arrested do not have the money to post bail, right? So now, if I am living in a community of lower income community or maybe a community of color that is not financially thriving, and my son gets arrested, or I get arrested, right? And I'm living in this community, and now I've been accused of a crime, and the judge arbitrarily, sets a bail of $5,000. I now, as the person that has been arrested, have to come up with $5,000 in order to gain my freedom so I can get out of jail, so I can then begin the process of fighting the case that has been presented to me, or fighting the accusation that has been placed upon me, right? Now, in many of these communities, you're dealing with many of these communities, many of the individuals are living below the poverty line in terms of household income based on, the statistics that determine what is and what is not poverty here in America. $5,000 is not fun amount. $5,000 is not money that's sitting around when you're dealing with individuals from these communities. So now what do? I'm in jail. I'm being accused of a crime. I want to be able to fight it, but I can't fight it from the inside, right? Because I still have a family that I have to take care of. I still have responsibilities. I still have a job. So what do? Well, I call the commercial bail bondsman, because the commercial bail bondsman has a business, and their business is, I am going to bail you out, sir. But of course, I'm going to bail you out for a fee, right? So the commercial bail bondsman says, well, your bail is $5,000, no problem. We'll charge you this non-refundable fee, and then once you pay this fee, you'll be able to get out and you can begin the process. Well, the bail bondsman typically, and this is across many states, typically charge about 10% of what the court assigned bond is, right? So if the judge says to you, your bond to get your freedom, to go out to fight your case, to make sure that you return back to the court to fight your case, your bond is your bail is $5,000. The commercial bail bondsman says, well, we'll pay the $5,000, but you have to pay us 10% of that $5,000, which is $500. And, to some people, $500 is nothing, right? Hey, no problem. I'll give you $500. I get out, get back to my life, start working on my case, come back for trial, and defend myself. But again, there is a systematic plan in place that targets communities where $500 is not available upon request, right? So, and this is not, and just to sidetrack a little bit, the disturbing part, not disturbing, I kind of stopped using that word, but the interesting thing that I found out is that they did a survey, and this is for the entire country. Almost 40% of Americans said that in the case of an emergency, they wouldn't have they don't have $400 to cover unexpected expenses, right? That's 40% of the country. I put that out there because now let's shrink it down to communities of lower income communities, and then many communities of color. So if the entire United States, 40% of the residents don't have $400 in case of an emergency, imagine what it's like when you're dealing with these targeted communities. Okay, so now going back to my example, $5,000 bail, $500, 10% I could pay to the bail bondsman. That's $500. I don't have $500. Well, guess what? I have to sit in jail. So now you're sitting in jail, right? And a lot of these cases are usually for non-violent offenses. So you're sitting in jail for, let's say you had, many times what happens is you got traffic tickets and you didn't pay the traffic tickets because, once again, you don't have the income to pay the traffic tickets because you're trying to pay rent and take care of your family, things of that nature. Now that ticket then goes into default. It goes into now a bench warrant, and now you get pulled over for a tail light, and they say you got a warrant. We're taking you to jail. Now you're sitting in jail for a minor traffic offense and some traffic tickets, and the judge then presents you with a bail. Now, here's the other interesting thing. many times these commercial, so you get the bail set, right? Many times, depending on the size of the bail bondsman, these commercial bail bondsman companies won't even help because they're looking to maximize the most money that they possibly can. So if your bail is $10,000, then they're like, we'll work with you. 5,000, we'll work with you. But if the judge sets a bail for you of $500, says, well, you can bail out and be released on your own recognizance for $500. But guess what? If you didn't have the $500 before you went to jail, you surely don't have it now. And you can't even call a bail bondsman because the bail is so small, the bail bondsman doesn't even want to help you out. So now what do? Now you're stuck in jail. So that's how the system works. So let me get back because I wanted to stay on topic. And I'm specifically talking about the commercial bail industry in the United States and how it works and, how predatory it is because it's very predatory. Typically, again, the industry already knows that it is going to serve a certain community of people. Typically, these are communities of color. Typically, these are communities of lower income. Typically, these are, and in many cases, you're dealing with women, okay? Because the women, unfortunately, have become, in many times, the main source of income in the household. So if their husband, their son, their daughter gets arrested, the first call that they make is usually to mom, right? Or to the wife, say, hey, I need you to bail me out. So these companies are targeting women of color, women in lower income communities, because they know that all they want to do is get their loved one out of jail. So it's literally like a marketing technique to ensure that these companies continue to increase their profits. So let's talk about the industry a little bit. So here's some key information. First of all, as I said, in the United States and the Philippines, basically the only two countries left that do cash bail systems, okay? The profits. Let's talk about the profits. So in the United States right now, there's around 15,000 listed bail bondsmen in the United States, right? And on average, they bail out about 2 million people every year, okay? Not only are they bailing out 2 million people every year, but in terms of the money that they make in profit, I'm talking about profit. These companies generate almost $2.4 billion each year in profit. Okay? That's $2.4 billion each year in profit. And I'm saying it twice because I want to make sure that that number doesn't go over anyone's head. And, the challenge and the problem with this process is that these companies, again, they're not doing this out of the kindness of their heart. They're not concerned with community safety and making sure people get a honest chance to fight their case. They already know that this is about a business and that they are specifically targeting specific communities in order to make these profits grow as much as possible. Again, there's really no discretion in terms of who they can speak to. In terms of from a regulatory standpoint, their discretion is based on who will and who can pay the money or who can generate the most money. In addition, you got many of these companies. What they do is they set up these predatory contracts that keep people in these agreements until the trial ends. So many times, not only will they, be the bail bondsman, but they'll hire bounty hunters to make sure that the people are coming to court, or they'll threaten people. I mean, there's really little regulation when it comes to many of these bail bondsmen. They charge some ridiculous fees. I mean, I was reading, what was I reading? I was reading about the fees that they charge. Listen to some of these fees that they charge. So again, there's a premium that has to be paid, right? I mean, there's a premium that has to be paid for the bond. So again, in the first example, I said, $5,000, right? But let's up it. $10,000 bail. In order for you to get out, you'd have to pay. You working with a bail bondsman, you have to pay $1,000, right? 10% of 10,000 is $1,000. If you don't have that $1,000, right, which you probably don't, right, because again, we're talking about specific communities, and this is not a generalization. This is an actual targeted plan that these companies have devised. You don't have the $10,000 to bail anybody out. You don't have the $1,000 for the premium. So what do? Well, the company says, well, we'll help you out. You can finance it. So now you're financing the $1,000 that you don't have to make weekly payments on the $1,000. And guess what? If you miss a payment, your loved one can then be picked up and taken back to jail. Okay? So first you have financing fees. They charge credit card processing fees, because many times if you have individuals that end up paying this, they're usually using a credit card to finance it because they don't have the $1,000 or the $500 sitting around. The second thing, or the third thing, you have notary fees. They pass those along. And then you have electronic monitoring fees, because if the court requires that the defendant has to have electronic monitoring while they're out fighting their case, then that service has to be set up through the court. The bail bondsman is the one that handles that, and then they pass those fees on. But of course, those fees always have a profit margin in them, because this is a for-profit business. It just goes on and on and on. But I wanted to also talk about the effects that this has, right? Because many times, like I said, these bail, the bail is set, and the bail is so small that sometimes the bail bondsmen won't even pick it up. And what ends up happening is that people sit in jail. I think I read on average, most people sit in pretrial for 135 days. That's, almost 4 months that you're sitting in jail because you couldn't pay a $500 bail. And a lot of times when that occurs, it's disruptive to the entire family. So let me play this clip from a woman who talks about what happens when you get locked up and you are unable to pay the bail. Take a listen to this.
I stayed in there for approximately a year, and I beat the case. But in that time, I lost so much by not being able to bail out. I had a son that got married. My grandmother died. My nephew was killed. It's very rare for a mother to get bailed out, because actually you're the head of the household, because the males are already incarcerated.
And so that is a perfect example of what happens in many of these cases. Locked up for a year, trying to fight the case, doesn't have the bail, loses job, family members passed on, and nothing is being done in terms of these people, in terms of these individuals being able to fight their case. Another fact: many people. When I read this is disturbing. So most people that are in jails today are sitting in jails. They're on pretrial. So these are not individuals that have been convicted. These are individuals that are in pre-trial detention. And there's a stat here from prisonpolicy.org. It says 67% of people sitting in jails now are being held on pretrial. That's almost 450,000 people that are sitting in jail. The average bond or the average bail for most felonies is $10,000. But again, these are individuals that don't have the ability to pay the $10,000 or to pay the 10% premium. And again, the average yearly income for many people that are in the system and are affected by this bail system is $16,000 for men, $11,000 for women, way below the poverty line. In terms of the percentage of pretrial population that is black, 43%. So once again, this is a systematic targeting of individual people. There's no denying that, right? Because if 43% of the population is black that is sitting in pretrial, but from a nationwide standpoint, black people only represent 13% of the United States population. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we call a targeted effort. And, getting back, I want to stay on track. So the commercial bail industry, and I specifically wanted to stay on topic with that because this is a huge topic. I mean, I can easily break this down into 4 or 5 different podcasts. But for the sake of this podcast, I wanted to focus on commercial bail industry. And so the commercial bail industry is not regulated, or I should say it has very little regulation. Many states don't even require the individuals to have licenses. Matter of fact, it says here that 10 states have no license requirements for bail agents, and while 37 others have minimal requirements. Currently, there are 4 or 5 states that do not have any bail system at all, so they don't do any cash bail system. I believe that's Illinois, Oregon. I can't remember the other 2 or the other 4, but I know Illinois and Oregon has done away with their cash bail system, so they don't even have that into effect. But again, going back, many of these bail bondsmen don't even have commercial bail companies are not even regulated in states. They have no licensing requirements, no exam requirements. Some of them don't even do criminal background checks. A lot of these bail bond companies don't have a residency requirement, so they can live in another state and operate almost like they're operating a franchise. And again, specifically and strategically placed in areas where they know that the arrest and over policing will be high enough that they can ensure that they get a profit from being in those areas. You know what? I'm going to keep going on with this because there's a lot more information that I would like to discuss about this. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop here with part 1. We're going to call this part 1 of the commercial bond industry. And I'm going to, break this into 2 parts so I can really dig my heels into some of the additional stats of how this is affecting people across the country, and then offer some of these solutions that have been presented to ensure that this does not continue to happen. So let's stop here, and we'll pick back up on this next week. People's Voice. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking us out to listen to the show. Greatly appreciated. For those of you who may not have listened to the part 1 of this broadcast, please, when you get an opportunity, check out part 1, Bail Leaves People in Jail. This is actually part 2. In part 1, I basically went over some of the challenges that are currently being brought towards bail reform, because just to quickly recap, here in the United States, cash bail system is still being practiced, and the cash bail system is the practice of if an individual is arrested, they are then put into jail, and in order for them to get out of jail, they are assigned a bail, right? Some type of arbitrary amount that is assigned by a judge, a magistrate, or some officer of the court. The problem with the cash bail system is that cash bail is often set to a level in terms of dollar amount where the individuals or targeted individuals in this case, and many times it's people of color and people of lower income status, those bail amounts are set too high, and then what ends up happening is that those individuals unfortunately have to sit in jail until their trial, right? Because once you're arrested, you're only being accused of a crime. You're not actually being convicted of a crime, and you're supposed to have the opportunity, or you should have the opportunity to, after you're arrested and booked, leave jail, then come back at another date to your trial so you can defend yourself against the accusations that have been levied against you. So that was basically what we covered in part 1. And let me, like I did in part 1, just give an official definition of what bail is. And then what I wanted to do today was to talk about some of the recommendations that have been made to do away with the cash bail system. And one of the reasons behind wanting to do away with the cash bail system is because the cash bail system is can be very predatory. Commercial bond companies literally are profiting off of the backs of many individuals who are unable to pay these bail amounts. I said last week, currently the commercial bail industry, and it literally is an industry, grosses almost $2.4 billion a year. That is, split between 15,000 commercial bail bond companies in the United States. And I'm just talking about in the United States because, and another note, based on the research that I was doing, there's only two developed countries in the world that still use the cash bail system, and that's the United States and the Philippines. So, but here in the United States, it has become a way for companies to generate profit, because once again, these bail amounts are set. People want to get out of jail. They don't have the money to pay the bail, right? Bail is set at $5,000 by the court. Many times, the individuals that are caught into the system don't have the funds to pay. Their family doesn't have the funds to pay. And so what has to happen is then they have to go to a bail bondsman. And if the bail bondsman decides to even take their case or to provide them with the bail, then they're required to pay a premium fee, right? So typically, if it's a $5,000 bail, the bail bondsman will say, well, you have to give us 10% of that $5,000 for you to secure the bond, the bail bond, and then we'll go to the court and get your loved one released or get you released. Well, even in the cases where it's a 10% and $500 is the premium, many times individuals cannot, come up with those type of funds to properly support themselves in their cases. So, but let me give a definition of bail. Again, let me get back on track. The purpose of this was to now talk about some of the solutions or recommendations that have been put forth to move the bail reform process along and to eventually do away with the cash bail system here in the United States. So let me give a definition of bail again. And this is from the American Bar Association. Bail, and I'm going to read this directly. Bail is the amount of money defendants must post to be released from custody until their trial. Bail is not a fine. It is not supposed to be used as punishment. The purpose of bail is simply to ensure that defendants will appear for trial and all pretrial hearings for which they must be present. Bail is returned to defendants when their trial is over, in some states minus a processing fee. So that's the official definition of bail based on the American Bar Association. So now a couple of key things about that, and I touched on it a little bit last week. First thing, it says bail is supposed to be returned to defendants when the trial is over. Well, the problem is that when an individual goes to a commercial bail company, commercial bail bond company, there is no return of the premium that they must pay, right? The bail is returned back to the bail bondsman, but the bail, the premium that the individual paid is not given back to them, right? That's basically the cost of doing business, so to speak. So that's number one. Number two, the purpose of it is for individuals to return for trial and pre-trial. And I'll get into that a little bit when I'm talking about some of the recommendations that have been made to do away with the cash bail system. And, I think one of the two most important things is that bail is not a fine. Many times, at least, before me understanding the entire process, you think person goes to jail, oh, they gave them, bail is like some type of fine. It's not a fine. It's simply for them to ensure that the person comes back. But if the person can't afford the bail, then they're never going to leave. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then also, it's not supposed to be a punishment. So when these numbers are arbitrarily just set by the court, it's not to punish a person, for what they've been accused of. Again, this is an accusation. This is not conviction. So it's not supposed to be used as a punishment. But so that's the definition of bail. That's what we talked about a little bit last week. Now let me move the conversation forward. So today I wanted to talk about some of the recommendations that have been discussed in terms of how to eliminate cash bail in the United States, and particularly to do away with the commercial bail system, because this is it's a two-part problem, right? Because number one, you have the bail process, right? That needs to be reformed. But then you have the commercial bail industry that is profiting from the bail that the court set. So it's a two-prong issue. So want to talk about some of the recommendations that have been discussed, and I think many of them would be greatly useful if they were implemented. And I'm getting this information from AmericanProgress.org. They did a great fact sheet on the cash bail system. And so this is where a lot of my research was done. So eliminating cash bail, eliminating commercial bail. It kind of notes here that some states have maintained that, cash bail practices need to stay in effect. But for certain states like Illinois, Wisconsin, and Kentucky, they've banned the commercial bail industry through legislation. Oregon and Massachusetts have also ended commercial bail practices. So these are states that have done away with commercial bail bondsmen. Right? They cannot. An individual goes to jail because they've been accused of a crime. There is no bail bondsman. The bail has to be paid through the court. Now, again, like I said before, it's a two-pronged approach. A two-pronged issue. So they've eliminated the commercial bail practices, but what they've done instead is that many of these states rely on now state-ran commercial bail systems. So it eliminates the problem from one aspect in terms of getting rid of some of the predatory practices of the commercial bail industry, right? The bail bond industry. By putting legislation through for these particular states, they've eliminated the bail bondsmen and the predatory practices that many of these bail bond companies practice. But they haven't eliminated the cash bail system. So in that case, there's still work to do in those states, but that is one solution in terms of getting rid of one piece of the problem, right? Many of these many of these states, I firmly believe, need to enact legislation that looks into getting rid of commercial bond companies so they can eliminate the predatory practices that many of these companies practice. And it's much more effective because rather than paying a premium for a commercial bail, like they have to do when you go to a commercial bail bondsman, the individual pays the 10% to the courts. Now, it doesn't say if that 10% is returned after if the court case is heard and, that person is, it doesn't say if the cash is returned back to the accused or the defendant once they come back from trial. But instead of paying that 10% to a commercial bail bondsman company, they can pay that directly to the state. So this helps to alleviate some of the abuses and the racial profiling and economic profiling that a lot of these commercial bail bond companies practice. Another solution that has been suggested, and there's evidence that it has worked, is establishing pretrial services in individual local jurisdictions and states. Pretrial, it says here, pretrial service agencies currently operate in 300 jurisdictions around the country and provide, many services to ensure court appearance, such as monitoring and supplemental services. Pretrial services, so how pretrial services work is that a person goes into jail and they're booked, they're processed, and then there's basically a agency, a local or state-ran agency that is responsible for ensuring that individuals come back for their trial. And I've read, because I know in D.C., this is something, in Washington, D.C., they use pretrial services. And matter of fact, there was an attorney that spoke about this a little bit. Let me play this clip. This is from the David Parkman show. This is Alec Karakatanis Alec Karakatenis, who's a civil rights lawyer, and he talks a little bit about the process of pretrial services and how that works. So let me play this, and then we'll continue the conversation.
That's interestingly not the case in the District of Columbia, where I live and practice, or in any of the federal courts in any of the 50 states around the country. In those systems, people are released prior to trial without having to pay any money, unless the government proves that they're a danger to the community or risk of flight. And so in the federal system and in DC, decisions about whether a human being is kept in a cage prior to trial are made based on evidence and about whether they're a danger rather than based on someone's poverty.
And so that's kind of how the pretrial services process works. Like I said, it's worked very well in DC. I believe, and I'm kind of searching for it because, I like to be accurate, but I believe they have almost like an 85%, 90% return rate in terms of individuals that have been accused of a crime coming back for their trial. So this totally eliminates the bail process, right? Investing in pretrial services helps jurisdictions lessen their reliance on commercial and cash bail systems, and as I'm reading here from AmericanProgress.org. And it ensures that appearance rates and public safety stays intact, because many of the arguments around cash bail systems, and this is currently going on around the country, but I know in New York City, Mayor Eric Adams is pushing for stronger cash bail process because, in New York City, they've done some reform with the cash bail system. There are many law enforcement individuals are saying that because of the reforms, that's why crime is up. But there is stat after stat that says that, commercial eliminating cash bail does not increase crime. There's stat after stat after stat that you can read, and maybe I'll refer to that as I'm going through here. But getting back, so pretrial services, in terms of having individuals come back to court, they have a high appearance rate. And this is, again, currently there's almost 300 jurisdictions across the country that have pretrial services. But once again, when you have you have the issue from both sides, right? You have law enforcement that has fallen in love with not, I shouldn't say law enforcement, but the court system falling in love with being able to let go of the responsibility of having to set bail and then ensure that individuals come back, right? So that's why these industries get established, because basically the courts are saying, well, we don't want to deal with it. We'll give you a license to deal with it, and then you can go and set an amount that you want to charge individuals, and then you'll be responsible if they come back to court or not. But with pretrial services, this becomes a responsibility of the state, local jurisdictions. And once again, it eliminates the commercial bail system, right? Which, again, the problem with the commercial bail system is that it is widely noted, and you can pull article after article after article about the predatory practices that the commercial bail industry implements, particularly when it comes to people of lower income status and people of color. So this would help to eliminate that portion of it. In addition, right, so like I said before, this is a two-pronged issue. So we got the commercial bail industry, and then we have the cash bail process, and then we have the commercial bail industry, right? The cash bail process allows the commercial bail industry to benefit. So in the case of pretrial services, there's no cash bail and there's no commercial bail bond company that is in effect. So, you've basically eliminated both problems. Now, let me be very transparent and clear. Many times that the bail is set, these are for non-violent offenses. Now, don't get me wrong. If somebody has committed murder, somebody has, arson, anything violent, okay? Again, they're accused of a crime. In those cases, particularly if the pre-evidence is so overwhelming that, and I mean, there's video, there's, if it's something like that, then no bail should be set, in my opinion, right? Again, many times the bail is set for these lower offenses that are keeping people in jail because they cannot afford the bail, and they sit in jail for months and months and months. So let me get back, because I'm starting to get off track. So pretrial services. So let me just review the first two. So the first one is to eliminate commercial bail, which some states have, such as Illinois, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Oregon, and Massachusetts. That's just eliminating commercial bail companies. In those states, the states basically run the cash bail system. So eliminated one problem. Second solution is establish pretrial services like they've done in D.C. They've done it over 300 jurisdictions around the country. And that's where no cash bail, no commercial bail bondsman. Pretrial services is responsible for ensuring that the individuals that have been accused of a crime come back to court to deal with their court case. And and much research that has been done on this shows that they have a high appearance rate. Like, again, I'm quoting, I know it's between 85% and 90% in DC, and I'm sure it's high around the country. Okay, those are the two solutions. The next solution, invest in regulatory and enforcement mechanisms. Now, and again, I'm reading this information from the AmericanProgress.org. It states here, historically, state agencies with regulatory authority over the commercial bail industry have inadequately enforced claims against the industry. Excuse me. And I talked about this in part one. The commercial bail industry is very much unregulated. In many states, there are no real requirements to become a bail bondsman. There are no exams, there are no certifications, background checks in terms of employees that they bring on. There's no, some states there's no criminal background checks. There's very light regulatory regulation of this industry, which allows this industry to continue to be predatory, and this is part of the problem. So, investing in regulatory and enforcement mechanisms, this would have to be at the state and local level for state regulations to be enforced, first of all implemented, but then enforced to ensure that these companies are not practicing predatory level of acts towards people, towards the most vulnerable or targeted individuals in the criminal system. And then last but not least, it says here, strengthen consumer protection laws. Current customer protection laws guard against many types of abuses that are perpetrated by the commercial bail industry, but explicit exemptions and unclear statutory language often prevent these laws from applying to the industry. So this is kind of mirroring the previous solution, but definitely stronger legislation has to be enacted. It has to be very clear about what they can and cannot do, because again, the commercial bail bond industry is very discriminatory as well. As I said last week, and I keep referring to last week because it kind of ties all of these things in, but many times if the bail is too low, they won't even take it, right? So you might go to the court might assign a $500 bail. And I said last week, $500 may not be a lot to some people, but to many people, $500 is a lot of money. And if they're not able to come up with that $500, that person that has been accused or their loved ones will sit in jail until their trial date. And, on average, many times people who can't pay bail sit in jail for almost 4 months. I think it was like 130, 135 days on average. At that point, you lost your job. If you have children, there's no telling, where your children are at. No telling what type of other activities that may occur while you're sitting in jail, because you're sitting in an environment that is conducive to additional acts of violence that many, and you've heard the stories. I mean, we all know the story of Khalif Browder, and unfortunately what happened to that young man when he was accused of a crime, and some of the things that he went through at Rikers Island. But anyway, let me get back. So in terms of solutions, there are 4 recommendations that have been either suggested, implemented, or are strongly being pushed to be enacted as permanent. Number 1, eliminate commercial bail. States have already done it. It's shown to be effective. That's something that can be done. Establish pretrial services. Again, 300 jurisdictions across the country have done this already. Washington, D.C. is a model for it. I think Washington, D.C. has been doing it since 1992. So it clearly there's a clear track record that this works. If for anyone who may say, well, we don't know if it's going to work, all you got to do is just look at Washington, D.C., and you can see that this is something that's effective. In terms of investing in regulatory and enforcement mechanisms, definitely states have to do more in terms of regulation of the commercial bail industry to ensure that the predatory practices do not continue to happen. And then last but not least, strengthen consumer protection laws. There has to be more legislation put forth to ensure that these companies cannot continue to practice their predatory ways in terms of targeting and implementing their practices on the most vulnerable, which in this case, based on the research that I've done the last 3 weeks on this, is usually targeted towards lower incomes and people of color. And the information is there. So I don't know where, if there's anyone disputing that. There's tons and tons of information on that. So those are the 4 recommendations. I wholeheartedly support all 4 of them. I specifically, especially I should say, like establishing pretrial services. Some of the proponents of pretrial services say it's too expensive. It's going to cost too much money. I read a stat. Where was that stat that I read? The cost of, I think it was like the cost of having someone sit in jail was $65 a day. I don't want to misquote, but I read a quote. The cost of bail to pretrial, the cost of having someone sit in jail compared to the cost of pretrial services is like, it's not even close. Pretrial services is like a drop in the bucket compared to the cost of having a person sit in jail. That cost is paid for by us, the taxpayers, while that person sits in jail, compared to the individual being out of jail and being able to fight their case. So I'm in support of pretrial services. That's all I wanted to cover today. I hope this was informative. I hope you have gotten some information about this. Again, if you want to read about any of this information, like I said, AmericanProgress.org did a great job in terms of their fact sheet. You could also go to ABA. You can go to ACLU. There's tons of information about the commercial bail process, the cash bail process, and also the commercial bail bond industry. So that is my time for today. As always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the people's voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute. The people's voice.